Welcome to the Braver Angels podcast, a new way of talking politics. I'm your host for today, Randy Liaz. I'm the Senior Operations Manager for Braver Angels, as well as California State Coordinator and a frequent workshop moderator. I've been on the pod before, but this is my first time hosting, and I'm really excited to bring on today my good friend, Robin Bellamo, and his friend and business partner, Jim Hamill. They're co-owners of Ben Gallery, that's B-E-H-N, as you can see on Robin's shirt, in Carmel, Indiana. And my first question for you guys, is it Carmel or Carmel?
Carmel.
Carmel.
That
All
is
right.
It's a little confusing coming from California, I know, but you always know people who have experience with California because they ask the same question.
Yeah, we are simple people out here. All right. Well, Robin is one of my dearest friends. And when we talked recently about his new gallery, his vision for it struck me so much as aligned with the work that we do at Braver Angels. So I just had to get him on the pod. And his wife, Adrienne, is also one of my closest friends. In fact, she was the first new friend that I made when I moved out to Northville, Michigan at the world famous Park Place Apartments. And she introduced me to soccer and a whole world of people that I really loved. And I kind of followed you guys out to California, and you stuck around a couple of years and then pieced out back to the Midwest. But through that time, I got to see you get married and make some really great kids. Shout out to Neva and Bodhi, and make some really great pasta as well.
Yeah.
And I watched your transition to photography from teaching, and you two remain two of my favorite people on earth. So I'm really excited to see you here.
We love you too, man.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And now, Jim, this is the first time that we're actually meeting, but I've heard a lot about you and I'm excited to get to know you. So first of all, anyone who holds the esteem of my friend Robin can't be half bad. And he's mentioned the yin and yang of your relationship, that you balance each other out and make each other more complete. So, I know that each of you had a transition to photography from very different careers. So I'd love to know how that unfolded for each one of you.
Sure, I'll go first. And yeah, I came from sort of a legal background. I was a lawyer, and I was also sort of the managing partner of our firm. So it was a business aspect of it as well. So I think of myself as having come from sort of the business background, even though it was a legal situation. And I sort of approach things in a lot of ways from that angle. I always think of Robin as more of a pure artist than I am. And where, I am a guy that goes out and takes pictures, and got started because it was more of a travel thing than it was a photography thing at first. And photography got added on to it and became, a big part of it. But the photography came sort of second. And I've never really been comfortable with the idea of being an artist. I remember the first time somebody said to me, how do you become an artist? And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm not an artist, and so I think Robin's a lot more comfortable with that. And so we are, very different, but that's how I sort of came to it. We talked about gallery a lot, and a gallery, and we talked about what we liked and didn't like about other galleries. And we found that, even though we came from really different places, that we kind of agreed on what we wanted a gallery to be like. And so that's how we've approached it. So,
yeah, no, well, and so Jim and I did come from opposite directions, really, and we're somehow converging into the same space. But I grew up in an environment where, my mom plays music, my dad is an artist, entrepreneurial lifestyle, and so I grew up in that environment, pretty comfortable with it. And originally my path was art and photography. And then I kind of got detoured. That's another story for another day. But I got detoured to become an educator, which I taught, junior high and high school for about 10 years. And then slowly but surely, I started gravitating towards that original path and passion of photography. And eventually, when we made this move back to Indiana from California, it was a logical time for me to make that full transition. So I've been doing it full time ever since 2014, pretty much. And it's true. I did grow up very comfortable with that title of artist. And I think it's been interesting talking with Jim. Is some people are very comfortable with that. And now we had a conversation once, or I remember you talking about the artist, the ivory tower kind of thing. And Jim's like, art, no, that's I'm not that. But I do think it's kind of allowed us to start on that path of like, for some reason we have come from different places, but we've had it's been fun to actually listen about how he got there versus how I did, because it's a very foreign concept, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I understand that you two met when Jim was on a teaching trip to Indiana. So Robin, were you the student at that point?
Yep. I said, Jim taught me everything I know in about 2 hours. So to explain that better, there's a group in Indiana of photographers. It's a club that's been around for over 100 years. It's kind of this small group invitation only club. And I was a member of this group, and at those, we meet twice a year, and at those meetings in different places, different locations in the state or out of state, one of the things that this group is committed to is continued education. So we usually have somebody come in to do some type of a presentation on a topic, and they become our guest for the weekend, blah, blah. So Jim was called in from Dallas to do a talk on nighttime photography. He'll tell you more, but Jim does classes with Digital Photography School, and he's written a book, and he's a smart guy, but he's not an artist, right? Yeah, he's an artist. But in any case, so he came and he's talking to us about nighttime photography. So we learned from him for a couple hours. And then as our guest, he kind of hung out for the weekend. So everybody loved Jim. Jim loved everybody else. And he's the craziest person he comes to Indiana at least twice a year ever since to come to these group meetings. So he's an honorary member of this group now. So that forced us to kind of meet a couple times a year and talk more. And that's kind of, we can get to the story about how we ended up here, but that was kind of, it was through that route that we ended up talking more.
Right on. And Jim, you're still in Dallas?
I am, yeah. I'm in Dallas. Like Robin said, though, I started coming to this group twice a year when they have meetings, and I bring my wife, and then she liked everybody too. So it just became this thing that twice a year we'd come up here for that. And then I started coming up for other things as well. And before you know it, it seems like I'm coming here all the time.
Was that 2016 when you came?
I think so.
I think it was. Yeah, I think it was.
So about 5 years.
And Carmel's a great place to visit. I've gotten to visit them a couple times there, and it's just a lovely town. We got to see a July 4th parade, and it was
I've been just blown away by Carmel. It's absolutely amazing. I never would have guessed. I knew nothing about Indianapolis or even Indiana before all this got started, and so it's been crazy. And you know, Carmel, just how nice it is, the different parts of it. I've just been really blown away by it.
Yeah, the downtown is beautiful. Where you guys have your gallery is amazing. I love the look of the building. It's so colorful. There's just lots of great looking facades down there. So yeah, it's really cool.
We're right outside. There's like a square where they have park and concerts and everything right out there. I don't know. Yeah, you really can't see it, but yeah, it's just great, especially in the summer. You know, when you were here. So it's awesome.
Yeah. You know, Robin, you mentioned that the skill that served you best as a teacher was listening and really reading a student's needs and state of mind, something like that. And I definitely really relate to that idea. I love running workshops, and my favorite part of running Braver Angels workshops is really listening to what the participants say and reinforcing what most strongly connects them with the material, right? So, but Jim, you know, I know that you, as you said, you're kind of more left-brained and analytical, less of a pure artist than Robin is. How does that approach? Well, how does that affect your approach to teaching?
Well, I mean, I very much agree with that, but I sort of had that beaten into me, I would say, in two ways. That number one, when I was practicing law, you know, I was a litigator in commercial litigation. And when you went to a hearing or court or whatever, you learn over time that when a judge asks a question or something like that, we make note of it. And at the end, if the judge doesn't rule, you can just take the little few things the judge said during the hearing and go home and look at them. And even if they seemed innocuous at the time, by looking at them all together later, you knew exactly what was going to happen. That people tell you, even if you don't put it together properly, they're telling you what they know, what they think, what they don't know, and all that. So I kind of had that beaten into me. And then when I started doing photography, like Robin said, I started doing some writing and some things like that. And I wrote a lot of articles for a website called Digital Photography School. And I was always on the lookout for topics. And they measured you by how many people read your article or clicked like on it or, shared it or whatever. And the ones that were always head and shoulders above all the other articles were the ones that were basically where somebody asked me a question and I turned it into an article. And so I was always listening then from that point forward, like, what can they tell me about what they want to know, what they don't know, what they would. And so I was just very much looking for that.
Right.
Yeah.
So kind of the art of reading between the lines and seeing the subtext of what people are asking. And also, I guess from their question, trying to understand their motivations for learning and their motivations for just being in that conversation with you, right?
Right. Yeah. And I just will say this too, like when I was practicing law, if you ever walked into a situation where you thought the other side was just way off base or just crazy or whatever, it always meant that I was wrong, or I was missing something about what they were saying. And so, it was sort of a self-preservation thing that you don't want to walk into court and then learn the hard way that they actually had a point that you didn't understand. So you get very diligent about trying to figure out what they were really saying and what you were missing.
I always felt in education, to tack onto that a little bit, when you have to decide what your intention is when you're communicating with your student. You have to make a decision. Are you teaching for you to deliver content? Are you teaching for them to receive content? So when you think about it from the perspective of them receiving content, I can't deliver it in the way that makes sense to me. I have to really anticipate what makes sense to them. And the only way to figure that out is to ask them questions and to probe them and see not only where they're at level wise to what they can actually handle, but also where their interests are. So you can kind of find your in to figure out, to build that rapport so you can actually say something that's relevant, because otherwise you can say, I could say the most profound thing, but if they're not in a place to receive it, it was meaningless. So again, I may be a little dissatisfied as an educator to say, oh, I didn't hit these benchmarks today. But the reality was, if I wanted them to absorb, I had to be willing to sacrifice maybe what my intention was with the content and actually give them what they actually needed in place of that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think what each of you has said kind of indicates that there's a little bit of putting the ego aside, and you have a pretty strong intention of the way that you want to communicate. But when you get into the moment and you realize that you don't have all the information, right? It's related to the concept that we lean on a lot, intellectual humility, right? And just recognizing that there's things that you got to look out for that you didn't anticipate. And I'm wondering also, within photography, when you take a picture and you have a time to really focus on all of the details that are captured in frame, that it probably shows you a lot of things that you didn't really notice in the moment. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I would for sure. And I know Robin and I both, you always try to take the best picture you can at the time, but then the editing process later is where you see a lot more when you have time to sit and look at it and, look at this lighting or this texture or this whatever and try to draw this out a little bit, or maybe I don't like this part, so I'll cut it off, or, whatever. So yeah, I'd say there's a lot of that.
I think too, I mean, I don't know about you, Jim, but when I take photographs, a lot of times you stay focused on one thing and you have an intention, but sometimes you see something and you're not sure what you see, but you're responding to like a feeling. There's kind of this gut feeling like there's something here. So you're forced to start looking at it from different angles. And sometimes you shoot it and sometimes you do get that different angle and you're like, man, that was it. I found it. I think I got a way I can deliver this that people can appreciate it, what I just felt. Or there's other times, and maybe more often than not, that man, I didn't quite get there. But then you take a little break, you come back to your computer, you start calling your images, and then you look at it, and then you start seeing things you didn't see before. And then you are able to identify the thing that maybe is what triggered you, but you couldn't even see in the moment, if that makes sense. So that kind of pause, reflection, and then taking another look at a different time. I experienced that quite a bit to your point. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it speaks to the fact that our perspectives are different, not just from person to person, but from time to time for each individual person, right? So Robin, I would imagine that when you were teaching kids, I remember getting to see one of your classrooms back in Michigan, or no, in San Diego, right? At the charter school.
You might have been at both, but yes, charter school would have been in San Diego. That's correct.
Yeah, and you know, that there was highly individualized attention to the kids there, and I would imagine that you know, each student is their own unique challenge, but each day is its own unique challenge with each of those students. That student is going to be in a different frame of mind from day to day, right?
That's right. That's right. When I used to teach, one of my biggest frustrations was, and sometimes it was in my colleagues and sometimes it was in myself, but you kind of have, you know, you have your standards and benchmarks that you're required to teach. So you're trying to hit those each day, because if you don't hit them, you kind of get behind, blah, blah, blah. But the point is that as a result of that systematic approach, we tend to kind of, a lot of teachers will have like a file drawer for that benchmark, and they've written out their lesson plan, and that's how they're going to deliver it. So it comes that day, you're going to teach that thing, and they, you know, sometimes they go and pull it out of this drawer, and then they try to deliver it that way, and then it's a failure. It doesn't work very well. And you know, one of the things that I did a lot, and probably is one of my biggest frustrations with education, is I decided somewhere along the way, pretty early on, like, that doesn't work. Like, that's not how this is. I need to know well enough and respond well enough to be off the cuff. And I always felt like the best educators weren't necessarily the ones that knew the best content or had the most in their head or even knew the content best. It was the ones that were able to understand how to deliver the content. And if you didn't know the answers, it didn't matter, because you could guide any student to any level of content. I mean, especially with the World Wide Web as we have it. I mean, so, but the real talent or the skill set was in evaluating that situation and being able to connect those dots.
Yeah. So Jim, how was Robin as a student?
He's the worst. Yeah. No, it was fun. It was an interesting thing, is that I didn't really know what I was getting into. And like Robin said, I went up there for the weekend and I started hanging around these guys, and I went, oh, and it's a good example of what Robin was talking about, because I didn't know these people. I talked to photography clubs before. And so I kind of thought that's what I was walking into. But this was all professional photographers, and they were sort of highly decorated professional photographers at that. And so I kind of went, oh, what did I just walk into here? You know, and I really changed a lot about what I was going to present for really much on the fly when I talked to them, because you know, it was a different thing, and Robin was one of them too. So yeah, it was a very different thing than what I thought I was getting into, and I had to sort of adapt. And if I would have done what Robin was talking about, it's just sort of, you know, stick with the program, it would have been a disaster.
Yeah, right. Jim took us to the lab that day. I remember.
That's right. Yeah, I totally made that up. I mean, not made it up, but
that became the biggest part of your conversation.
Right.
I remember.
Yeah. There was a color space that I use that is not very widely known, that I just sort of mentioned it, and I could tell people got real interested.
It's the one thing that people weren't that familiar with in that group, you know.
And so I spent a lot of time talking about it, that I had no intention of ever talking about it, but it just sort of came up and worked out.
But then you went off on it, realized. You locked. I mean, I remember, because then it was like an hour conversation about it. Yeah.
Because I was like, oh my God, you don't know about this? And I was like, this is going to change your life. Here we go.
You did.
You know?
So that's exactly what you said. It did.
Yeah. And so it was night photography that you were coming to talk to them about. What are the, obviously there, you know, light is just the number one element that you're playing with in photography. What are the biggest differences in terms of shooting at night versus shooting during the day?
There's a lot, really. And I do it, and there's different types. Like some people like to go get the stars, and I do a lot, and I do some of that too. But I think what I do most is sort of go in cities. And so it's very different. It's all man-made light. And so you're dealing with a situation where, like, if you just walk up and took a picture with your camera as is, what you're going to have is just two things: total black in the background, and then wherever the bright lights are, it'll be pure white. And so you get first thing is, man, you got to get that under control. And that's through a process, partially when you're taking the picture and partly when you're processing the picture. And then partially you're dealing with really long shutter. Basically, a camera works, not everybody knows this, that a camera gathers light by taking a picture. And normally the camera works so fast that it's more or less instantaneous. So you just press the button, it takes the picture. Well, all of a sudden at night, the camera needs to take some time to get enough light in there to do a proper exposure. And so instead of just going, it's going like, you know what I mean? Like I could have sat here a while longer.
I was wondering.
Riveting video. But it takes a long time, and it can take, and so instead of doing this more or less instantaneous thing, you're doing something that takes seconds or minutes or whatever. And so then you start adding in additional things too, because now things are moving through your frame while you're taking the picture. And so you got that going on. So there's a lot of different elements to it as well. So. Yeah. And that's just sort of the tip of the iceberg. It goes on from there, but I'd bore you with sort of photography nuances.
Well, no, I would love to geek out about photography. I'm not, I don't know too much myself about it, but I do find it quite interesting, and the technological advancements and raw files and that basically give you every single piece of information in there. That I find that absolutely fascinating. But I do want to pivot to the reason that I got so excited talking to Robin in our conversation a few months ago about your gallery and the approach that you two take. So I saw your blog post about your perspective series, commenting on the fact that each of us experiences the world in a completely unique way, right? And you actually juxtapose some moments or places that are captured from each of your unique perspectives, and you set those images side by side. And so I was wondering, first of all, how does looking through the camera influence and change how you see the world?
Well, I think using the camera gives you an opportunity, one, to show people how you see things. And it also provides an opportunity to see how other people see things. And so one of the things that Jim and I experienced, and part of the reason we opened the gallery just in September here, and I can get into details about what our philosophy was, but we decided to open with a series of collections that we're going to do over time, and it's called our Perspective series. And Perspectives really looks at how we see things, even though Jim and I, we used Ireland as our first topic, okay? Perspectives could be on any topic, but we chose Ireland. The reason we did is because we had just traveled Ireland together, and we were on the same trip, so that meant we went to all the same places on the same days at the same times, and you would expect that all the pictures we got, because we were almost this close on a lot of them, should have looked relatively the same. And if you look at them, you'll find they look very much different. And we thought that's interesting to take this idea of we can be in the same places and see things so differently, which we said really raises the opportunity. If you take it, we can do one of two things. I could say, we talked about this earlier. I could say, Jim, this is how you see Ireland right here. Okay. You see it? And he says, and Jim says,
no, you idiot.
No. This is how you see Ireland over here. Okay. And so that's one option. And I think that we like to do that sometimes. But the other opportunity is you can say, hey, Jim, that's pretty cool. I didn't even see that. Tell me more about that. Okay. And then he can say, oh, because now I validate him too, right? I've said, okay, yeah, you're interested in what I'm doing. You're curious about me, even though it's different. I said, and then he says, oh, that's kind of cool too. And then you end up in this kind of exchange where you're really appreciating the other. So I think to the point that we made earlier about listening, we really felt, this is the artsy side of me that will come out, but really felt like, what do we have to gain from really exploring from that example of when we talk to people, not so much trying to jam what we see or feel down their throat, as opposed gather what they have to offer us to expand kind of our vision. So now that we don't have just our slice, because every time I ask Jim how he saw things, how did you shoot that? And I ask a little bit more, and then my slice of the pie opens a little bit, right? I learn a little bit from it. I don't have to agree with all of it. It doesn't mean I'm going to shoot like Jim now. It just means that now I appreciate it at the very least. So.
Well, yeah, and we do things, and to make that a little more concrete,
Yeah.
we do it a lot different. Like if you went and looked at our pictures from the Ireland thing, like the first thing is Robin's black and white, and Robin likes to get it right up close to stuff and really, and make it big of some very close perspective. Whereas and there's a couple of Robins there. Those are doorways if you can't see it.
Doors.
And whereas mine are in color. And mine it's almost like I want to take this really broad expanse in front of me and then make it into a shape and show you Ireland that way. And so there's something like one of mine. And so they're very different. That said, there were pictures, where, and one of the things we did separate and apart from those pictures you saw was like, we said, okay, Robin said, Jim, now you create some black and whites. And I said, you create some colors. And we did. And then we kind of went, and Robin, one of my better pictures from the trip was one where I had really got far out there was some fog, with some trees, and there was a mountain in the background. And so I did what I do, which is I create the whole scene. And Robin said, well, that's interesting, but isn't the real thing here is this fog in these trees? What if you really got in on that? And that's what I did, and it was arguably the best image of the scene or of the set from mine. That sort of using the little bit, what he brought to the table on that.
I guess we've gathered that, and that's been illustrated over and over since we've started even this partnership. As we've talked more, is we definitely don't agree on everything probably, but we always joke we couldn't be more different, but we never argue with each other because I feel like we have a very mutual respect for one another. And I think as we've experienced what Jim just said, like when we do take the time to ask and listen and we realize, oh, it leads us to places we wouldn't go on our own. And a lot of times it leads us to better places than we could have gone on our own. So it's like, well, now if I'm like this naturally and Jim is like this naturally, well, as partners, we can be kind of like this as long as we embrace the entire spectrum. If that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I love that mentality. It's definitely a big part of what we do. And well, I'm wondering, is there a limit to that? Right. Is it, Robin, you said that, sometimes you, what's that?
I said, we'll let you know.
Right. Well, yeah. So you said sometimes you get to the point where it's really difficult to understand one another and but you still have that respect for one another. Are there moments when the other person's perspective is so alien that it leads to this frustration or just, really not.
Right. What you're saying happens, and it happens for both of us all the time. But I think it really does come back to this thing Robin was talking about, which is a sort of respect there, because, and I say it all the time, is that, what about this? I'm not doing that, but we're going to let Robin be Robin. I say it all the time. Let Robin be Robin, and then let him go off and create something in his way that I don't understand and I don't get it, and it's not what I would do. But I have enough confidence in his abilities. I've seen enough of his work. I know what he does, and I know what he's capable of, and I know what he brings to the table, that if I just leave it alone, it's gonna get there and be something, pretty great. But I just have to sort of have confidence that that's going to happen. And, like I say, let Robin be Robin.
Well, I think the other piece is even if, there's times where we don't have to get each other but to support it. But even if we know, like, it might not go as kind of planned, always, but we can always come back and reflect on it. And then we can talk about why it didn't go well. And then we can learn from it. And then we expand on that next time we do it too. So I think it's good to, even if we don't wholeheartedly feel it, we know that there's something to be gained by going that path and letting that person take charge. And I think that's kind of it. When we are disagreeing, we don't really argue, but sometimes we just say, all right, Jim, that's cool. Go and you do it. And I'll do this over here. We don't always have to do things at the same time, because then we would be kind of trying to say, no, do it this way, do it this way. But it's just, you let somebody own it. You just trust them enough to say, you take the driver's seat on this one. I'll take the driver's seat on this one. We have our strengths, we have our weaknesses. And
one of the things we did early, and, you know, I didn't really want to do it, but we sat down and we sort of mapped out, you know, what are we all about? What are our goals?
That's right.
What's our sort of plan? And we went through this whole thing with all these boxes that we had to fill in and do all this stuff, but it identified who we are, what we're doing, and how we're going to do it, in terms of what we're going to create, in terms of how we're going to market, in terms of all this stuff. And it was painful to sit down and do, but we did it. And now that solves a lot of problems for us, because now if we're wrestling with something, we can go,
we already made this decision.
let's go back. We made this decision. So, you know, we just don't know it. But we just got to figure out, okay, let's go back to the sort of guiding principles that we started with this thing. And then what does that have to say here? And more often than not, that answers the question.
Well, I think too, when you take that chance and you kind of go down a path that is foreign to you, a lot of times you're very pleasantly surprised. You're like, wow, that worked out really quite well, which in turn really makes you trust that person that much more and say, all right, I don't have to get it. But go for it, you know?
Right. Yeah. And the proof is in the pudding, where you actually are seeing other people interact with their art. Right. And so it's not just your own reaction to it, it's their reaction as well. Right. And so each one of you may have an easier time appealing to or relating to a certain segment, perhaps. So that's highly complimentary. So I guess I would wonder, when people come into the gallery, and they're talking to you about your photography, your partner's photography, and I know that you have a couple other photographers that that have their art in the gallery. So do you often get reinterpretations of not just other people's art, but your own photography, and often are challenged to see it in a different way based on the people who are visiting?
Yeah. And I know that this is Robin, and we talked about this, and Robin's here more than I am. And so he likes to let people draw their own conclusions a lot more without really trying to guide them. But one of the things I would add to that too, is that it's actually easier to talk about somebody else's art than it is your own. Much easier. When you sort of, if I brag on Robin's art too, like, it somehow seems sort of noble of me to do that. Whereas if I bragged on my own art, then I would be a pompous, fill
in the blank.
Right. Yeah. So it's a family channel, so I won't say it. But it just sounds horrible. And so we didn't intend that, but it's actually easier to do, and it's more comfortable to do for me to talk about Robin's art than it probably is for him to talk about his own, and vice versa.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, I think one of the things we agreed on when we were talking about a gallery, like how this whole thing started was we went to drink beer. we went to have a beer. And we started talking. At that time, I was thinking about opening a studio space, a brick and mortar space, and had this kind of soft idea of putting just artwork in the front. I wanted a place that wasn't making client work, but it was making things for me too. Okay. So I could satisfy that artist need of growing and owning my own space too. And part of the vision was also creating a space where people could come in and be part of the artist's journey. They could see an artist working, et cetera. Okay. And as we were talking about it, I could tell Jim was responding to it well, and then he would offer a little bit. And within a couple of weeks, we started talking about this idea of maybe partnering on this thing. And part of the reason we had a common vision is we were very much in parallel with, we did not enjoy the experience that we had going into other fine arts galleries sometimes. And then we started talking about why that was. And we said, well, we decided we don't really want to say that they're bad. We just decided to identify what was different, we would do differently. And some of those things were, we felt like a lot of times you went into a gallery and you were kind of told what was good, what was not good. And you were told what was valuable and what was not valuable. And if you didn't come in with some preconceived knowledge of what they thought you should know, you were kind of made to feel obsolete or like you didn't matter, which is the same pitfall I remember from teaching. If you made a student feel that way, Are they going to learn from you? Probably not. So we really wanted an environment where the art for experience was about the end user. It's like teaching that student. It wasn't about us necessarily. Of course, we wanted to share something, but it was really more about how can we provide a connection and how can we help people interpret art and how can we come to their level as opposed to try to tell them to take our art at what we said it had to be. So I think to kind of that kind of contributes to this idea of being able to create a space that is built around other people's needs and using art to do that. I can't remember.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
I stay on topic.
Right.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, it reminds me of the principle that, you know, when we're interacting with people who have very different viewpoints politically, you know, with the work that we do, you know, if we are pointing out something that we see as an inconsistency, right, and we start accusing them of hypocrisy or just not getting it, or, you know, things like that, then people tend to get defensive and they shut down, and they're a lot less open to your point of view and just, you know, a rich experience, right? So it sounds like what you're really trying to foster is that openness of, it's kind of the yes and thing. Like, instead of, well, yes, but this is how I see it, instead you say, oh yes, and maybe did you also look at this other thing that's in there, but what you said is perfectly valid for your perspective, right?
Sure. I think you kind of touched on this earlier when you were talking about in a trial case. If there was a disagreement, you said you had to kind of own that you were part of that equation, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's often the case is, you know, we might have differences on something, but sometimes it's not a matter of, like you said, it's this or that. Sometimes they can both exist together, or maybe neither one exists, but there's a reason that there's that conflict. A lot of times it's not that specific thing that we're talking about, but there's other things getting in the way more often than not. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And Robin, I mean, you had a quote that when we talked last time, you said that you were amazed at how committed people are to their own certainty. Right. And that really rang true for me. And it, you know, of course, is consistent with the idea of intellectual humility that I mentioned before. So, you know, how do you think about intellectual humility in your work? And actually the question that I am most curious about is there anything that you're absolutely sure of?
Well, you want to take that one?
Yeah.
Well, I would say this is, and I'm not sure this will totally hit on it, but I think it'll lead us there. One of the things I really enjoy about the relationship with Jim is Jim always seems pretty confident and sure about things. I don't know if he actually is, but he comes across that way. And I'm like, anybody I talk to who seems certain about anything, I'm highly skeptical. I'm like, if I've experienced anything, especially this last year, it's uncertainty. It's like, I cannot make a decision about any one thing. And I don't think it's just me. I just think you can just see so many angles and so many sides of things. It's hard to really be convicted. But Jim will be like, nope, it's this way. And it's really kind of relaxes me, because I'm like, well, it's nice to know that kind of exists. So I don't know. I think, is there anything I'm sure about? I don't know.
I'm not. Yeah, I picked these little micro things about human nature that I become sure of, and I think that's kind of what Robin's talking about.
Yeah.
People are kind of like this, and so they do that. But going to your business is that, like, I'm not sure about anything politically. You know what I mean? And I wouldn't pretend to be. Is that, I mean, especially now when people are, you know. Because of sort of mistrust of the media, everybody's getting their stuff from all these, they're getting different fact bases for their opinions. I mean, It used to be, at least we had sort of a common fact base, and I don't think that even exists anymore. But so I'm not sure about anything in terms of big grandiose conclusions, you know, but I will say, Robin and I were driving around today, and I forgot how we were talking about this, but we were talking about the idea of somebody getting angry and sort of huffing up and, you know, to make a big display, you better do this and blah, blah, blah. And I said, you know, that never works. You know, it always results. They think they're going to cow the other person into going, oh, sorry. And it always is the opposite, is that, oh yeah, well, right back at you. And I've never met a person who was so weak and timid that when somebody came at them like that they didn't just go right back at them. And it always happens.
Flight or flight, baby.
I'm certain of that. And I told Rob, I'm certain of that. And I'm certain that alcohol causes hangovers. And that is,
that's right.
That's about, those are
too much
things.
alcohol. I think that's certain. We've tested that. I'm sure that people want to be heard. I'm sure that people want to feel validated.
Right.
And I'm sure that almost everybody I know wants to feel like they have some reason for being here, some purpose. And sometimes it doesn't take a whole lot to give that to somebody, except just to shut our face and to kind of listen to what they have to say. It doesn't matter if we agree or not. Like sometimes you have to make a decision when you enter a conversation. Am I in this conversation for me, for them, or for both of us? If you're in it for somebody else, you need to learn, maybe I don't need to be thinking of what my next point's going to be. Maybe this is not the time for that. I'm just going to listen. And I think we got to enter conversations more consciously to make that decision before we enter or while we're in it, to make that decision so that we don't start stepping into those other spaces. And it goes back to that teaching thing. And I can't tell you how much as much as I sometimes wish I had not strayed my creative path, because I'm like, man, I lost 10 years. But on the other hand, what I gained from it, I feel like was a sensitivity towards other human beings to try to figure out how they operate and how I do, and how we build connections. Because that's really what art is all about for me. And I think that's what relationships are all about. And I think that's kind of what we're talking to right now, so I think those are the kinds of things we can sort of feel sure about. Nobody likes to feel pain, right? I'm sure about that. It could go on, but you get the point.
But going into art, I would say there is no, there's nothing certain there. No. And as a good example of that, like in the photography world has image competitions all over the place. Okay. And a few years ago, I entered a picture into one, and it was like top 10 in the entire competition of hundreds of pictures.
Thousands.
No, it wasn't full.
Hundreds.
It was hundreds. And so maybe it was, I don't know, it was a lot. And then I, sort of buoyed with this success, I entered it into a different image competition, and they just punished it. I mean, it basically gave it a failing grade.
Worst thing ever.
Yeah. It was like, and it was like, what? I was like top 10 over here. And it was the same judges. It was through PPA judges on both competitions, which is Professional Photographers of America. Same judges, same image, not the same exact people, but same sort of methodology,
format, same scoring
training,
system,
same scoring. And you just don't know. You just don't know what people are going to respond to or not respond to, or to your point, it might be a different day. Another great example of that is Robin. I had a picture, it was a nighttime picture. And when I first took it, Robin said, oh, wow, this is great. It's a standout image. I love this one. And then we're working on a collection for our gallery right now. We were going through a bunch of night images, and we were like going through them. And then that one came up, and Robin was like, nah, doesn't do much for me. It's just, so it changes, people's brains
people
change over time.
And that's okay. Like, right. I think that's kind of the point. Like, brains are meant to be fluid. They're not meant to be stagnant. We're supposed to be thinking, we're supposed to be evolving. It always drives me nuts when people call somebody out and say, you said this last time and you're a hypocrite this. And it's like, well, I mean, give somebody a break. Like, we all make changes. I think that's the other thing is who of us really has the gall to say, like, you're a sinner? And
the greatest quote ever, the greatest example of that I ever saw was when Bill Parcells was the coach of the Dallas Cowboys. Some reporter tried to call him out for, doing different things with different players, and he's like, you're like, isn't that inconsistent? And he was like, yeah, I don't want to be consistent. I want to be right. That was his thing. And so, what I think it changes, it morphs. Yeah. So,
right. Yeah. And I mean, both of you, it seems like, from what I know of you, Robin, and from what I was reading about you, Jim, in terms of the success that you've had within the field of photography has been a lot. And I think, and it seems like each of you has had success fairly rapidly, in the beginnings of your careers. And, I wonder how that success, but also your perspective about, the things that you were just telling me help to keep you grounded and recognize that, well, I may feel like I'm on the top of the world right now because I'm being given this award, but I always know that there's more to learn and that there's other people who do things that maybe I can't.
Well, photography and art in general have a way of kicking you in the teeth every day to keep you
1 hour to the next. Sometimes.
1 hour to the next. And I don't know anybody in this business that doesn't kind of operate this way. That whether you write an article or whether you have a picture where or say I write an article, I can get 100 positive comments and all of this. Yeah. If I get one negative, I'm just like,
I'm terrible.
Oh God, yeah. And everybody's like that. Yeah. And you just gotta. And more to the point, kind of bringing it back to what you were talking about too, is that when you do have some success with this stuff, it buoys you for when you do have the failures, and you always do, to sort of keep it even keel. When I was in litigation, there was a partner at one firm I worked at that always just said, don't let your highs get too high and don't let your lows get too low. And you got to sort of have these successes to sort of keep you from getting too down in the dumps when the inevitable failure comes 20 minutes later, and then vice versa.
Well, that's really true. I think having those successes has helped to kind of take a breath and say, well, maybe I don't completely suck, but to draw a parallel to that, to what the gain is from listening to other people, listening to Jim, having that respect, because it works the same way in the day to day, because you don't win awards every day. That kind of stops at some point. But when you have other people around you who you take the time to validate and listen to, they can tell when you're having a shit day, and pardon me, and they're gonna but they kind of say, well, remember this. They start reminding you about stuff, and they start telling you about stuff, and they help create that equilibrium again. And I think there's that's the gain you get from giving that ear when you need to. If that makes sense, or one of the gains.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and Robin, I mean, you were talking about how you really focus on what the goal of a conversation is, and the meaning that you can kind of get from it. It is the goal just to communicate something to that person, or is it to learn, or and it seems like you have a deep sense of what makes life meaningful. Right. I'm listening to the audiobook version of Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, which is an incredible.
I just read that recently. Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually am reading it because I saw this interview between Cory Booker and Mark Gerson, a red and blue talking to one another about actually Jewish holidays, and the way that they talked about this was just. It was very impactful on both of their lives. And so I've been thinking a lot about meaning and what gives our lives structure and purpose. And, when we're talking about those highs and lows, right, that's a lot of it has to do with happiness, right? Which can be fleeting. It seems less stable perhaps than meaning itself. So I was wondering if either of you have some thoughts on the difference between happiness and meaning, particularly for you, what brings your life meaning versus just the more fleeting type of happiness.
Right. And just to bring it in tune with that book too, I mean, he talks a lot about process, about, he talks about, sort of the toil of your life has to be the meaning in many cases. And it goes to something that we've talked about, which is we both like photography. We both like taking pictures. We both like working on computers and editing pictures. We both like printing pictures. We both like displaying pictures. One of the amazing things for me was when I first started doing art fairs, and just, it's a lot of work, man, getting them up and doing all that. And it's a little scary. But then, to go through it is fun. So I like all these different parts of the process. And to me, that's the important thing. And it sort of goes to what he was talking about, which is, for him, it was the toil, that the suffering that you had to sort of learn. And I don't really suffer, but to me, it sort of comes back to that process, that you have to like this process, and you can't get hung up on, who likes it and who doesn't, and that sort of thing.
Sure.
I'd say most of the things that I hold in the highest regard, if I had to reflect on my life, that I think were the best moments, were not the times where I felt like they were the easiest things, right? They were a lot of times they were some of the hardest things, but it was because I put so much into them, and they were a ton of work. It took the work, and it did give that meaning. And I think that meaning is what creates that happiness. And I think as a human being, I just think we're communal people. It's not just about validation or getting credit for things. It's about connections. It's about providing for others. I was, even in both businesses, I'm a terrible salesman. I can never sell. I shouldn't admit this. I don't do this for money, and I wish I did more. But
I picked the worst partner in the world.
Yeah, in a lot of ways,
you could have told me this before.
I think I did. You just drank too much. But it's really comes down to educating and asking people. And we talked about this earlier. Like, what is it that you need? Or what is it that my skill set, what can I bring to your table that will provide something for you? And that, it turns back twofold, because I get the satisfaction of creating and providing service and making somebody else feel good. And as a result, typically, even in business, it turns out to be the best sales tactic ever, because really what I'm doing is I am considering them, and I'm figuring out how to close a circle or to contribute to a larger something and get that purpose and get that meaning. And in turn, I feel happy, I guess.
Right on.
That's my quick answer.
Yeah. that is quick for Robin.
It takes me a while to figure out what I'm trying to say.
I do have one thing on this topic of communication, which we've talked a lot about on this, is that I just learned, and I learned this in the legal world, is that, communication is a two-way street, of course, but when you have to take the view that when you're the communicating to another person, that if they don't grasp what you say or what you're telling them or what you're trying to get to them, it's your fault.
Yeah, that's right.
It's always 100% of the time your fault. It's never their fault. They're not. You've just failed to get your view across, your point across, or whatever. So I think
so. We shouldn't get mad at them, and say, what the hell's wrong with you?
There's this tendency to go, you're just ignoring what I'm saying, or you're just stupid, or I don't know what. But but if you take the view, in 100% of the time, that it's always your fault if they don't understand what you're saying, then I think that's a helpful thing.
But if you continue down that road and it just gets worse and worse and worse, doesn't it? As opposed to, like, once you recognize it's not working out, taking those few steps back and say, let's start at zero again, and let's just try a different route here.
And usually, there's some blockage going on there that you just don't know about, and you've got to go figure it out, identify it, and then get through it. And so that's what.
When we kind of done that when we've run into like issues making videos or things that we've had, like, man, we keep trying. It just seems like there's some things come really easy, right? And then there's other things that's like, we just can't get past this hurdle. And there's some things we've talked about, like, we just got to get past it. We got to keep drilling it, but maybe we should try it this way, or maybe we should do this, or let's flip this, or whatever the case may be. And a couple of times it's succeeded, and there's other things we're still working on, but our worth, we know it's important, but we can't, like, taking that picture. You're not sure why, you just feel it's the right thing to do, but you just got to keep on trying from different spaces until something clicks.
Right. Yeah, and it is about being responsive, I guess, to your environment and to the person you're talking to, if it's communication, and their current frame of mind. And so, Jim, what you're saying, certainly resonates with with the workshops that I have taught about reaching across to someone who feels very differently from you, right? We emphasize listening in a very active way. So if you are the listener, right, just making sure that you're being active and saying, is this what you're saying? Right. and that you're affirming your understanding and giving that person a chance to be responsive themselves, right? Yeah. But we also say you don't want to just understand the other person. You want to speak in a way that you can be more easily understood. And I think you're absolutely right that people underemphasize the onus that's on them to say things in a way that resonates along that person's wavelength and is receivable, because it isn't necessarily that person's fault for receiving it a certain way, because you don't know all of the influences, all the experiences that have come before that are influencing the way, that are filtering, right? In a very photographer kind of language, the filter that overlays all the information that we take in, right, is there, and we have to account for that, right? It's just like managing light that's coming into a camera.
Right. Yeah. And so very often you got to sort of take this step back and then figure out where their experience is, sort of, because you go from A to B to C to D, and there's your sort of logical sequence for what you think. But somewhere they're not at C, and I got to figure out why they're not at C. They're off over here somewhere, and how do they get there? And so you got to back up and figure that out.
I think every time you enter a conversation, Joe, I know earlier I said you got to identify what your intent is or what you're trying to achieve, but I think you also got to make a commitment to the conversation. Every time you walk into any type of conversation, a phone call, in person, if you don't have a commitment to it, to make the communication work, because then when you're communicating, that's the intent. You got to communicate. It's back and forth. If you don't have a commitment to it, you should just not engage. I mean, it's kind of like if you don't have anything good to say, don't say anything at all kind of thing. It's the same thing. I mean, you got to be willing to, you get what I'm saying. Yeah. I'm just going to say it again.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it very much. And so, and I was going to ask you about one of the pairs of photos that I really, really liked from that Perspective blog post. So that it was the horse. And Robin, I know that because you were in Jim's photo, I believe, actually shooting on the ground. I'm looking at it now, and you're face to face with this horse.
Oh no, that was Jim face to face with the horse.
Oh, okay. I got it wrong.
I believe. Can you remind me of the post? What is? I don't even know.
So this is the post that's Perspectives from September.
Okay.
So the very beginning, and so it looks like the overhead photo is like a drone photo. Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Yes.
We both went with drones. One of us crashed ours.
I don't know who it was.
Wasn't me.
I'm the reckless one, as you can surely tell.
But yeah, so it would have been a drone picture and then a close-up picture too.
Yeah, if I remember right, Jim was interacting with this horse really closely with this camera, and I remember I think I had the drone up and was taking a picture overhead. And quite honestly, that other picture of Jim could have been a third photographer's. I don't remember exactly, or it was Jim. It doesn't matter. I guess the point is really seeing it from different angles, right? I think that was the illustration of the post.
Yeah. I absolutely loved it. Like seeing that set of photos, because when I looked at the first one, I couldn't tell. There was a line and it looked like it was above the horse. And then I looked at the other photo and I was like, oh no, that's actually the fence that the horse is tucking its head over. So
you could understand what you were actually seeing by getting above it or changing where you were looking from. And I think you're illustrating that point in conversation. It's very much the same.
Right, absolutely. So do you guys sell these photos together? Is there like a BOGO 50 situation going on here?
Well, we actually, now that you mention it, we actually made a perspectives folio that we had released with the collection. And in that folio, it was a bundle of loose images. Some of them were from the collection, some of them were juxtaposition of black and white and color. But at the last three of them, we took two images that had a lot of similarities, as far as maybe it was the image Jim took of a sheep and a picture that I took of a sheep. But one of them was from kind of a different space, a big wide angle. One of them was very tight kind of thing, or different places. But then we had like little handwritten notes next to them, which kind of said, this is what I was thinking, and this is the story that unfolded. And Jim said the same thing. So we did that with a series of photos. So there's at least three of them that are in there that kind of do that.
Yeah, I absolutely love them. They're gorgeous photos. And so to close out, I want to ask you, if people want to check out your work, where should they go?
Well,
I say number one, go to bengallery.com.
Yeah, BEHN gallery.com. And then individually, Jim and I both have our own businesses as well. I have bellamostudios.com. So that's more of my portrait and business branding and commissioned fine artwork that we do as a service-driven studio. And then Jim?
I'm at jimhamelphotography.com, and I'm sort of a traveler. I do a lot of landscapes and cityscapes and things like that, and try to get those from, was all over the world till last year. Now it's all over the country. And then we'll soon be all over the world again as we open up.
Yeah.
So.
And I think the biggest takeaway, if I could ask all of your members, everybody in the world to say, we want people to engage with us more than on a observation level. We want people to ask us questions. That was the whole point of being an artist in the space. You could come in and you could meet us, you could talk to us, we could talk about art, we could get that. And I think that's what, the interaction is so important. The connection that we're making through what we're doing is really what we're after here. So we highly encourage people to reach out, ask questions, travel with us, whatever the case may be. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that you have some speakers behind you, and you do mix those media, right? So you in your gallery, you give people a really unique experience of mixing it with music and things like that.
In this current rotation of art, we rotate. We don't have an exact schedule, but relatively quarterly. But one of the goals was always to keep this space fresh, so that people could come in and learn something new. They could feel a new perspective, if you will, or they could just kind of get a new thought. So in this particular collection, one of the focuses is collaboration. So I have 3 pieces hanging in the front of the house. One of them is right behind me, and there's 2 on the other wall over here. And one of our guest artists is a musician. His name is Matt Barber, and Matt, he composes music, a music engineer. He's done recording, blah, blah, blah. But basically, Matt and I worked, and he created soundtracks essentially for my still pieces of fine art. So people can sit down and have sort of a multi-sensory immersive experience where they can listen to this original piece of music while looking at this original piece of art, and hopefully have an original experience and talk about that as well. So.
Right on. That sounds great. Well, I so appreciate both of you taking the time to chat with me today. And we will make sure to include those links that you mentioned in the description of the pod. And for people who enjoyed this discussion and appreciate the work that we're doing at Braver Angels, check us out at braverangels.org, where we'd love for you to join us in growing our grassroots movement across the country. And of course, like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. We're building a house united. Thanks for listening.